Well, good afternoon, everyone, and happy Monday. It's great to be back up here. Just finished a couple-hour session. We're still doing the kind of high-level budget numbers, going through the side-by-side proposals of our office, the House, and the Senate, and then spent some this morning with some of the fiscal staff was in there, Chairs Rosen, Moran, to work on just some of the more detailed numbers, but also had a briefing from Deed on broadband, the broader broadband proposal of how do we get border-to-border done. And then we talked about the infrastructure bill, the IIJA money, and what that'll look like in terms of state match and how it will be structured, where that money will go. With that being said, the last couple of weeks have been incredibly productive, from the UI Trust Fund being refilled, to frontline workers, to money to manage COVID. This week, maybe as early as tomorrow, we may be signing legislation, a very nice veterans package that we're grateful for, one that we certainly advocated for, and there was a lot of commonality. We have the opioid settlement money to get moving that will work in coordination with our coordinator in the governor's office and our allies that are out there. So I remain really hopeful. We're checking off some of these things. We took care of the immediate stuff. Now we're starting to work on this budget stuff. We can start hopefully moving towards some of the future that we get at. But today, this meeting got us through all the spreadsheets all the way through, so we had the first high-level look together at where all things are at. I think for you and the folks that are in this building know how this works, a little bit different than maybe 2019 in the budget year, where this work is simultaneously happening, I think, in earnest amongst the chairs out there. While they don't have targets, which I kind of wish they did, so they had their universal numbers, they're still working to come together. And I think this veterans and this opioid piece, especially the veterans omnibus, shows that that's happening and it's coming to us. So this is not about deciding what the final is going to look like. It's more making all of the leadership familiar with everyone else's position, and then bringing in the policy experts to explain some of the nuanced differences, and then it'll be to try and find the compromise. But 2 weeks from adjournment, it's moving, it's working. There's a lot of work to be done. We'll meet again this afternoon for another 2-hour block, and I think this rhythm will probably go on as the committees are finishing up their work, and we can start to move towards some compromises. With that, any questions?
Have you started doing taxes? Have you looked at tax?
Yeah, we went through the tax proposal today. Again, not really any discussion on it. It's the professional staff, Anna Mingy, the budget director, basically saying, here's where the proposals are, here's where it's from, here's the long-term costs of this, here's the differences, and then where the different funds are coming from. So we did start to take a look at that.
Personally, do you see there any movement on Social Security taxes? You've got two different positions.
I was the one who moved it last session, so I've always been very, this was an issue for the Lieutenant Governor and I. We lifted that ceiling up more, so we exempted about 15,000 Minnesotans last time and lifted it for about 100,000. I think there's some room to move there. Again, I bring up the point, though, is that if you do full repeal, the bulk of that benefit goes to the wealthiest 10% of Minnesotans. But that doesn't exclude the fact that it's one of the reasons I proposed it when we first came to office, that we need to keep lifting that up a little further to make sure that those in the middle are not seeing a burden on that. So yeah, I think there's room to, and I leave compromise open across the board on many things, because I think, as I said, and Lieutenant Governor I've talked about often, there's win-win-wins here. Certainly the wins for the people of Minnesota we want, but I think there's both progressive and conservative wins that balance our budget and provide services.
Are you moving from either chamber on the direct payments you've proposed?
No, we haven't got into the specifics on it yet. I still, I'm going to continue. It's our responsibility. We have to balance the budget. That's our job to do that. And the thing I'm going to keep making the case of is this needs to be a balanced proposal of short-term relief for Minnesotans that can see a benefit to them in the short term, but doesn't cause a long-term deficit situation. So I think it's a combination, as I continue to say, which our proposal was, some tax cuts as well as these checks going back to folks, and then those investments that really save money: child care, health care, education.
Are you approaching this where you have to settle the tax cut direct payment issue first to know how much money there is left over, or is there a different way of approaching it?
Well, it's still fluid on that. I don't know if there's a different way. The question is a really good one because all the pieces fit together. We're certainly not going to negotiate a position away where we give tax cuts to the wealthiest Minnesotans and don't fund education. And I would argue that the Republicans are probably thinking we're not going to give them money for education unless we can get something in tax cuts. So I think what we're starting to see is kind of a clarification of where the positions are at and what that's going to look like when it comes together. This is really one of those situations where it has to be more holistic for everybody to get what they need out of it. So I just think this session here, the last one of these, kind of set the ground for everybody's at, and now we're going to start seeing where people are willing to move. And that's the next, well, probably 13 days is what it'll be.
Okay, last one.
As a former public teacher, how did the gap in special ed funding affect school budgets?
Yeah, and that's a good question. And I'm proud that the United States did this. We passed a federal law that said every child is going to receive the benefits. Those are required by that. There's a maintenance of effort that you have to reach that. Those are federally mandated services that we need to provide. When a school is doing their budget, they cannot shortchange those things, nor should they. It's immoral to do so, and our children deserve that. But what they end up having to do then is take those services from another area that's already in the budget. So what ends up happening, and I've seen this in our school, and I'm supportive if they do it, if you don't fix the cross-subsidy issue, one of the only ways schools can do this is they increase class sizes. And they can increase class sizes, or they remove staff. That's one of the things, and have less choices for students. So that cross-subsidy issue is a big issue. And just to be clear, this is a failure of the federal government to fulfill its requirement to fully fund as they did when they wrote the law. The law is right. It's ethically, morally the right thing to do, but they did it without the funding piece to it. So now the state is required to deliver those services. If the district doesn't have the money, they have to pull it from elsewhere. That's why on our budget last time, the House is looking at it this time, trying to provide the cross-subsidy. Again, for Minnesotans, what it means is that your district is under more pressure, staffing issues become more critical, and to be very honest, districts are only left with then the ability to do property tax or to do levies, and that's why we get the discrepancies in education across Minnesota. So that'll be a big conversation. Again, I say the good news is this: Minnesota finances are strong. We're reaching compromise on some fairly complex things, and at this point in time, whether you be a frontline worker, whether you're a small business, or whether you're Minnesotans wondering what happens next with COVID, those things were prioritized, taken care of, agreed upon, and signed into law. That bodes pretty well for us. Once again, divided legislature coming up with workable solutions. So we'll keep you updated, and we're back together again.
You met with the Wolves recently. Did the wage theft allegations against the subcontractor, their development, come up at all?
On which one?
With the Wolves, the wage theft.
Yeah, no. What came up in it, the question was meeting with the Vikings leadership and the issues of Viking lakes out there. I just mentioned that we need to make sure that our labor partners are treated fairly and that conversations are happening. At this point in time, there was no, there's no state involvement in it other than as it's starting to evolve. And that assurance is that, job creation and labor practices are a priority of the Vikings as they are of ours.
Well, when did you talk?
Thank you.
With the Wilfs?
In there?
A week ago when they came to visit you.
Yeah, just we talked about where the legislature thinks they're going to go on infrastructure, some public safety issues that they talked about, what happens around the Viking Stadium. Talked about growth and the potential for Minnesota, being very clear that the Wilfs, as far as the real estate arm of that, are here to stay. They're here to invest, and just pretty optimistic about it. No talk of sports betting at that time, and we didn't bring it up, and neither did they. So, thank you all. Thank you, guys.